Just 35 minutes to go for the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley's speech in Lok Sabha to the members of Parliament, on what are going to be the specific provisions in Union Budget 2016, what we are calling the tax booster coverage. Super Monday coverage begins in right earnest, and here is a reverse countdown to one of the most eagerly anticipated budget in recent times. A lot of people are expecting this budget to deliver a tax booster to the economy, be it in terms of startups, be it in terms of old tax reforms, be it in terms of cutting the headline tax rate, doing away with some tax exemptions, making further administrative reforms when it comes to tax administration. A lot of action is expected, and of course, a little bit of jitters. Will the period for computing long-term capital gains go up? Will dividend distribution tax go and dividend be taxed in the deferred? Will ICDS be deferred? What will happen to GST? So many questions to answer. And with us, Gautam Doshi, Group Managing Director of Reliance ADAG, one of the foremost tax experts. Wouldn't be out of place to call him a tax veteran, literally. We've seen over 40 union budgets. So right man to comment on today's budget. And we'll also be joined by Dinesh Kanabar, CEO of Dhruva Advisors. He'll join us in less than 5 minutes. Gautam bhai, what are your
Hello. Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
No, I couldn't hear in between. The voice was out, but okay.
Yeah,
sorry, Arun. Go on.
Yeah. So, Gautam bhai, what are the 3 things that you're expecting from Arun Jaitley in his budget speech?
I'm very difficult to predict, but one thing is certain. He's going to talk about growth. He's going to talk a lot about what he's going to spend on infrastructure, agriculture, and how he's going to improve the policies. Tax is going to be a minimal area and is not going to be the focus of his budget speech, as it should be and as has been in the last few years. So the main focus is going to be, where is the government going to push growth? How is it going to spend on infrastructure? The second, and when it comes to tax, I think he'll have to justify, if at all, he's increasing the service tax rate. But as of now, it looks like, I personally think he should not increase the rate. He should wait for GST to come. In that case, he doesn't really have to justify any increase. And fiscal wise, he doesn't really need that additional cash, which additional service tax would give him. So given that, he doesn't really need to justify any new taxes. In that case, the third and the greatest thing for him is to explain why he's giving concessions, whatever concessions he gives, whether he's giving the slight reduction in corporate tax, whether he's giving something on individual tax rates, whether he's giving anything on deferment on ICDS, POEM, things like that. So I'm sure he will cover that, and that will be something which any FM would enjoy when he has to announce goodies rather than to explain difficult situations.
Yeah, before I toss around to Amay, look at the economic policy document, presented by, I'm sure, Arvind Subramaniam, the chief economic advisor, has had a lot of inputs in preparing this document. But look at this document, and I would want to read out a couple of lines to you, Gautam bhai.
Sure.
It says, consider first why taxation is key to economic in a democracy. Taxation is about the obligations of citizenship. Taxation and
I'm missing you.
are the key nation building and democracy. Bringing more and more people into the tax net via some form of direct taxation will help in realizing the promise of Indian democracy. A very forceful case made, Gautam bhai, to bring more people in the tax net. And going ahead in the document, the economic policy document, it says that the increase in the threshold limit of personal income tax from 1.5 lakhs to right now, I think around 3 lakhs, 2.5 lakhs. The progressive increase in the threshold limit has actually pushed 1.65 crore people out of the tax net. So Gautam Bhai, here is a very forceful, emotional case of bringing those people in the tax net.
Yes, but actually in a era of computers and information technology, where you have enough information sources and enough routes by which information has to be provided of almost all types of transactions. Almost everybody is on the net in any case. Everybody is already involved. So whether he actually pays tax or he does not pay tax, he is subject to a degree of scrutiny. So I think this was different at a time when tax was one of the means of bringing people on board and knowing who's earning what and doing what. Today, I think you have enough other sources of information. So what is sought to be achieved by getting people to pay a nominal or minimal tax is not really any longer that important. If you consider that, then I think the question is how much money have we lost by putting 1.6 crore assessees outside the tax net? And the money may not be significant at all.
Roughly 30 to 40,000 crore rupees.
That is the real issue, and whether that 30,000, 40,000 is material, or we can make that good by, say, a 1% surcharge on the rich. And perhaps you can get much more out of it. And would that be something which is ultimately more acceptable, where people are looking at some goodies for the common man and for the middle class, as opposed to the rich who can afford to pay? So it's a question, I mean, again, it's a tightrope walk as to which route he will select. In the past, we have seen the economic survey and the finance bill don't necessarily have much in common. So while that may be the view of the economic advisor, it doesn't necessarily mean it is something which will appeal to the FM. Let's see what he does and what he feels.
Yeah, but Gautam Bhai, it says the document says that we asked how many taxpayers there would have been in 2012-13 if the threshold had been maintained at 1.5 lakh rupees, which was the threshold in 2008-9. We find that there would have been an additional 1.65 crore units incorporated within the taxation system, and tax revenues would have been about 31,500 crores greater. India's tax GDP would have increased by 0.32% just by not having raised the threshold so generously. So, Gautam, I would.
The rate has not been more than inflation at any stage. That 1.5 to 2.5 lakhs has consistently lagged inflation is my impression. I don't think it has gone ahead of inflation. So it is not as if you have really raised the limit. You have only, I mean, just adjusted it for inflation. So it's how you look at it.
Yeah, Gautam Bhai, I'll ask Amay to put you a couple of questions.
Sure, sure.
Gautam, good morning. Gautam Bhai, there has been.
Yeah, Amay. Sorry. Hello. Hello. Hello, I missed you in between, Amay. Please repeat. Hello.
On whether comprehensive. Gautam Bhai, your thoughts on central GST, whether government will consider that?
Again, I mean, according to me, we already have a central GST. You already have a situation where SANVAT goes across the board between excise and service tax. So it is not as if you pay one tax, you don't get a set-off against the other. All that you need is to improve the rules for set-off, give greater clarity, and give greater permission. Things like, I mean, illogical disallowances, for example, to take the view that if you spend on employee welfare, that is not spent for the purpose of production or for the purpose of service, and therefore it is not something to be allowed. That's the type of thing which we need to clarify. And if that is clarified, then you already have a central GST. The question is, should you have the same rate across the board? And I think the answer is no. Clearly, why
Gautam Bhai,
services are not taxed by the state, you can't have the same rate for services and goods when goods bear a double tax. Sorry. Hello.
Gautam bhai, can you hear us?
Now I could hear you say that. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah. Perfect. Gautam bhai, on the question of GAR, again, the finance minister last year in the budget speech or the year before said that we'll align GAR to BEPS and therefore the deferral to April 2017. So now that BEPS is here, country by country reporting might be legislated is the expectation. Is there any case right now really for deferral of GAR?
Except the fact that it is a very negative sentiment. And currently the whole objective of the tax laws is to improve sentiment. So therefore, the main case for deferral of GAR is the sentiment which it creates. And do we really need a GAR? Should we not have a rule or a section which allows, say, specific GARs to be notified without going to the parliament? And then keep on notifying specific GARs as and when you come across cases of tax avoidance, rather than a generalized GAR which gives a tremendous scope, opportunity to the tax administration to raise questions when you are still not sure that the tax administration is mature enough to handle it. That's the other reason why you have deferred GAR, that you want to train your tax officers, you want to reach a certain level of maturity before you can give them a weapon as potent as GAR. Otherwise, the sentiment which it will create will be troublesome. Welcome, Dinesh.
Hi, Gautam bhai.
How are you?
Very fine, thank you.
Yes, Arun. Can you hear us?
Yeah. I think we have Dinesh. Yeah, Gautam bhai, we lost the link, and now we have in fact Dinesh bhai also there. Dinesh bhai, quickly your expectations from the budget. The 2 or 3 things that you want to see on the tax side from the FMJP.
The two are different things. One is what is the expectation from the budget, and the other is what I really believe will happen. So the expectation from the budget really would be to say that how do we implement the we go ahead with the of tax laws and all that stuff. But really what I am in the budget, slew of measures to tax the rich, to see reallocation of resources, to see a number of things in that direction. What I'm really looking forward to is which of the specific recommendations of the issuer committee get implemented, where we will actually see some action laws being simplified. And one thing, which we have almost given, which now seems to be something on the card, as I heard the chief economic advisor a couple of days back, will the government be able to really exorcise this whole ghost of retrospective taxation of the past? So while we have a commitment to say that in future there will not be any retrospective taxation, for the first time I heard the chief economic advisor come back and say that we are now looking to see how will it be exercised for the past. And I was wondering really whether we are going to see direction there in
Yeah, Gautam bhai, hearing Dinesh bhai, he's virtually calling the finance minister an exorcist. So, Gautam bhai, any suggestions you have on how we can exercise the ghost of retrospective amendments? I remember you wrote a lengthy column last year, as a prelude to a budget coverage on how we can really put behind the retrospective amendment controversy. But anything that you can do, Gautam bhai, we are just circling the wagons, but unfortunately, we just haven't found a solution to this controversy.
I think the simplest thing like that is to take it head on. Just simply convert those retrospective amendments to prospective amendments. The revenue involved is not significant at all. Because in any case, whether you will actually collect that revenue is so uncertain that to put any value on that is meaningless. If that be true, the simplest solution is make it prospective. And I think that may be the best way to work, rather than to keep going round and find halfway house solutions, which ultimately will remain halfway house and will not give you the positive of having bitten the bullet, and yet have the same negatives of what converting retrospective to prospective would be. So you would have the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, Dinesh bhai, on poem, I think you also been a votary in the 5 points to the 5 ideas that you had for FM Arun Jaitley that you wrote for Tax Sutra. I think one point you clearly mentioned, I think, is deferral of poem. You made a strong case for it, that the guidelines have not yet been notified and therefore poem must be deferred. Dinesh bhai, is that your expectation, or you think that will happen?
I think I am expecting it to happen. I think it ought to happen and will happen. The very fact that a year after the provisions have been introduced, you have not been able to come up with the guideline shows that probably either there is an impossibility of performance, not because you don't have the rules, but because when you start discussing those rules with corporate India, you are not really able to come back with something which is definitive. And therefore, probably the need of the hour is more something like CFC rather than have something like a poem. The government needs to so the draft guidelines actually virtually go to convert the poem into CFC. Maybe that's what the government needs to do.
Perfect. Amit?
Gautam bhai, there has been a discussion on phasing out of the tax exemption coupled with reduction in corporate tax rate. If you were to pick any 1 or 2 exemptions that in today's economic context can go away, which one of these exemptions will be, which you think finance minister will perhaps tinker with?
Difficult to say, but I would think the first ones on the chopping block should be perhaps Chapter 6A, what's left of it, and then Section 10A and AA and all those, because quite a few of those exemptions can never be the reason for setting up an industry. Something which is going to save tax 5 years, 10 years down the road cannot really dictate whether you will go down that route or not go down that route. That decision has to be purely for commercial reasons. In that case, why should you lose tax through those exemptions, which are not really going to be the cause for somebody setting up a whole new, accepting to build a whole new road worth a few thousand crores. He's not going to do it for the tax exemption. Yes, subsidies, amounts which you charge for that, the premium you charge, the method of auction, how you are going to achieve that, those will make 100% difference. So you need to improve those rather than give tax exemptions. And that may be the first ones on the chopping block to my mind.
Yeah, Dinesh bhai, on the startup, a lot of action is expected. You are having the government put out virtually some policy document or the other with regards to startup every few days. But on the tax front, you really think there can be some big tax boosters that can spur the startups, or you think again it will be more cosmetics and we'll be lost in the rigmarole of the nitty-gritties and the fine print on who qualifies and who does not qualify for these tax exemptions?
So just one point first on what Gautam bhai mentioned earlier on really a tax exemptions elimination. One of the points which he rightly made was that you cannot have a situation where industries are set up only for a few years of tax exemption. And look at this situation where you could have 100 crore rupee, for example, of an investment leading to an industry showing profits of thousands of crores and claiming them to be tax exempt. So this entire shift, if at all one has to continue, even on a sunset basis, some of those deductions, they have to be on the basis of investment rather than to be on the basis of profit. On the Startup India, there is this classic dichotomy that on the one hand, you would like to remove all deductions, all exemptions, get the tax rate down from 30 to 25. And on the other hand, you have various demands which are actually conducive to the economy, whether it is Make in India, Startup India. One of the things on the Startup India where we are talking about a tax holiday in the initial years, I wonder how many of the startups actually end up making profit during that time frame. I think the proposed exemption of capital gains from sale of investment made in a startup, if reinvested,
in another startup is very, very welcome. And I do hope that the government goes ahead with it. I don't think it is cosmetic. I think it will spur some action. How much I cannot say, but it would be a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
The last point I would like to make there really is, how will the finance minister deal with R&D weighted deduction? This is one thing which the corporate India has been clamoring to say needs to be continued. There is, as we all know, the cutting edge that we have in whatever form, whether it is IT, whether it is pharma, whether it is autocom sector, which comes on account of our R&D capability. And the question really which comes up here is that, will the finance minister walk that tightrope and balance the need for continuing with some of these, or will he do away and really simply stick to the tax rate going down?
Yeah. Amay, when you look at some of the points that the tax exemptions that are supposed to go. On the other hand, we are batting for tax exemptions for startup. Clearly, there appears to be a dichotomy. We just aren't willing to let go of the tax exemption. So that is something, I think that's a very fair point, Dinesh Bhai, Gautam Bhai, that quite a few are making. I mean, from the budgets that we are seeing the world over, you had UK which legislated a diverted profits tax. You have France which is looking at a Google tax. So several governments across the world are in some ways legislating BEPS. Which are the BEPS action plans do you think the finance minister could legislate without inviting a pushback or a blowback from the foreign investors?
So I think very low-hanging fruit, so to speak, is country-by-country reporting, which is essentially a disclosure and not an additional tax per se, and that clearly seems to be one easy thing to be implemented. Other than this, many of the changes have to happen through the treaty-related changes. For example, we saw a Germany-Australia treaty getting amended to reflect the BEPS-related proposals. Another aspect that can be considered is on the interest deduction rules. Again, this has been agreed in the BEPS context, so one should not say that foreign investors aren't happy, because the G20 and OECD has consented on this, including India. So some kind of an interest deductibility restriction rule perhaps can also be considered in the coming budget. Some countries have already done that.
Dinesh bhai, you agree largely with Amay, what Amay has said, and do you think India might take the risk of annoying the foreign investors and going solo on any one of those action plans, or that looks unlikely?
It looks unlikely, but I would make just a couple of points here. First is, it is never really about law that one is worried about. So whether it is a CBC coming in, and to my mind, that does not even require amendment to law, it merely requires a certain changes to the rules. What does worry me is the way it gets implemented at the tax office. I have said this ever so much, and I would continue to repeat. There is nothing wrong with our transfer pricing regulations. It's really how they are administered at the tax office which creates litigation. Similarly, if India was to act consistently with the OECD recommendations and implement some of those recommendations, I don't think any foreign investors are going to view that negatively. The negativity arises from this lack of comfort to say, will India implement the regulations in the spirit and in the manner in which they ought to, or will the tax administration come down with a heavy hand on many of the things?
Yeah, Dinesh, I lost you for the last 30 seconds.
And just to add to that, take a thing like thin capitalization. In fact, I think we are better off charging tax on interest than applying a rule like thin capitalization, and yet having a situation where the domestic company may not have income at all, or the domestic operations may not have taxable income. At least if you are charging a tax on the interest, you are getting that. So you really need to consider whether you should really introduce some of these rules in a situation like ours. Yeah, sorry. And I have the same feeling on CBC. Until we can really ensure confidentiality, which is a very, very difficult one, by terms of rules and by terms of changes in the administration, can you really have confidential information lying about easily in a manner in which it can be captured.
Yeah, Dinesh bhai, we lost you for 30 seconds. Could you just summarize what you had to say on the BEPS point?
Yeah, it was just what I was mentioning earlier that look, we are talking about legislation coming in, and there is never a problem with legislation. It is the way the tax administration implements the legislation which becomes a cause for concern. Gautam bhai, for example, was just mentioning about CBC coming in, not a problem, but really ensuring confidentiality. And any of us who go to the tax office where you find the files being littered all across, what sort of confidentiality are we talking about? And that's a cause for concern, really.
Yeah, Dinesh bhai, if the files are being littered across, then I think we should be at the tax office every day. Yeah, last point for both of you all. Dinesh bhai, in the end,
I can't hear you, Arun.
yeah, Dinesh bhai, last question. Do you expect this to be a big, bold budget on the tax front, or will it be more of the status quo?
I think I can see significant changes on the tax side, particularly given the fact that the government would like to implement the Issuer Committee report, which is a very well written report. So while I'm not expecting this to be a big bang reform budget, on the tax side, I'm expecting many significant changes.
Gautam bhai, same sentiment?
No, my personal feeling is that perhaps we will not see much on tax at all. This is a budget for things other than tax, policies other than tax, and that's what he's going to really concentrate on. And tax
So
will be
you'll be happy with the status quo?
Yeah, I expect.
Gautam bhai has always batted for the status quo. Be it the income tax, not the income tax, no new income tax code, or even the other aspects of the income tax act. Gautam bhai has always been a traditionalist, a status quo person.
Yeah. So let's see. We need the Issuer Committee recommendations, but I can't see them coming in this budget.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks so much, Dinesh bhai and Gautam bhai. We'll have your comments, during the Finance Minister's speech, live on Tax Sutra's, live blog, and as also immediately as soon as we have a copy of that finance bill. Don't go anywhere, our viewers. This is going to be one action-packed day. There is no place other than taxsutra.com, and our budget coverage is powered by our new game-changing product, Orange, which combines the best of the historical database. And for the first time, you have income tax commentary, Chaturvedi and Pritisaria, which has been inbuilt into a historical database product. So our coverage today powered by Orange. Thank you, Dinesh bhai. Thank you, Gautam bhai. And quickly, a final word from our deputy editor, Swapna Marathe. Swapna, what are the expectations? You've seen over 15 budgets. How would you rate the last couple of budgets of Arun Jaitley, and what would you expect the finance minister to do? Swapna, quick.
Yeah, last two budgets were quite friendly to the taxpayer, but this year economic survey has seems to have said that there would be a lot of things going, a lot of exemptions going, no change in exemption limits and all that stuff. So it may not be that tax friendly. That's what my impression.
That's not a good note to begin the FM speech. But still, nevertheless, we'll watch in the next couple of minutes. And let me take all our viewers through the newsroom. Here we have Ankul, who coordinated the hangout. Ankul, we have Aditi here on Law Street India, and we have the entire newsroom. Oh, where is it? Here is the newsroom, the Tax Sutra budget newsroom. Everyone, hi. Hi. And just so that we don't miss out on anyone, the remaining action. All our Tax Sutra team that will bring you the live action through the day. For now, goodbye.